I was standing at my own front door at 6:15 a.m., luggage in hand, wearing the same smile I'd practiced in the bathroom mirror for 3 days straight. I kissed him goodbye, hugged him the way a good wife hugs her husband before a work trip, said, "I love you," and meant none of it, because I wasn't going anywhere. The car was parked 2 streets over. My bag had nothing in it, and the moment that front door clicked shut behind me, I stood completely still on that porch and exhaled for the first time in weeks. Then my phone buzzed. One message, from him, sent 11 seconds after I walked out. I looked down at the screen, and my stomach dropped so hard I had to grab the railing to stay upright. Because what he sent wasn't meant for me. And in that one moment, standing on my own front doorstep in the cold, everything I'd suspected, everything he'd denied, everything I'd talked myself out of believing, became impossible to ignore. Before I tell you what I did next, hit that subscribe button right now, give this video a like, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from tonight. Your city, your state, your country, drop it below so we know we're not sitting in this alone. Let's begin. My name is Claire Whitfield, and 18 months ago, I was the kind of woman who apologized for suspecting things that turned out to be true. I want you to understand what that means before I go any further, because this story is not just about what my husband did. It's about how long I convinced myself I was the problem. I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, the second of 3 daughters in a family where the women were taught, not harshly, not deliberately, but consistently, that keeping the peace was the highest form of love. My mother stayed calm when she should have been loud. My grandmother called silence dignity, and I absorbed all of it, the way children absorb everything, completely, without knowing I was learning anything at all. By the time I was 31, I was good at staying calm. Too good. I had married Daniel Whitfield 4 years earlier at a venue outside of Asheville on a Saturday in October when the leaves were doing exactly what October leaves are supposed to do, and everything looked like a photograph of the life you always imagined. Daniel was 34, an architect, tall in the way that fills a doorframe without trying. He had a way of entering a room that made people look up, not because he was loud, but because he carried himself like a man who had already decided the room was his. I had found that attractive once. Later, I would understand it differently. We were good together in the beginning, or I believed we were, which I now understand is not always the same thing. He was attentive, thoughtful in the specific ways that make you feel chosen. He remembered the small things, the coffee order, the name of my college roommate, the exact reason I didn't eat shellfish, details that made me feel seen. I built a life around a man who was very good at making me feel seen, and I did not notice for a long time when he stopped. The first thing I noticed wasn't another woman, it was a pause. We had been married 2 years when I started noticing the pauses. A half-second delay before he answered simple questions. A beat too long before he laughed at something I said. The kind of pauses that don't mean anything individually, but begin to accumulate, the way a slow drip accumulates, until one day you realize there is standing water on the floor and you don't remember when it started. I noticed the pauses, and I told myself I was tired. I noticed that he started keeping his phone face down on every surface, the counter, the nightstand, the coffee table, and I told myself that was just a habit people developed around screens. I noticed that he began staying late at the firm 3, sometimes 4 nights a week, always with a reason, always coherent, always plausible, and I told myself that his project load was genuinely heavy because he had mentioned a new development contract in March, and that explained everything. I was very good at explaining everything. My mother's daughter all the way down. The Wednesday it cracked open, I wasn't even looking. We were at dinner, not a special dinner, just a Tuesday in our kitchen with the overhead light that Daniel had been meaning to fix for 3 months still flickering slightly, and his phone lit up on the table. Face up for once. He reached for it fast. Not urgently, not obviously, but fast in the specific way of someone who has trained themselves to move quickly without appearing to hurry. I saw the screen for less than 2 seconds. a name I didn't recognize, a message preview I couldn't fully read, and an emoji at the end of whatever she said that was not the kind of emoji you send to a work contact. He turned it over, looked up at me, smiled, said, "Sorry, work thing," and went back to his food. I went back to mine. I did not say a word, but something shifted in my chest in that moment, quietly, permanently, like a door closing in a room you didn't know you'd been keeping open. I want to be honest with you about the next 3 months because I think there is a version of this story I could tell where I look like I handled everything perfectly, and that version would be a lie. The truth is that for 3 months, I lived in the space between knowing and not knowing, and it is the most exhausting place a human being can occupy. I checked. I told myself I wouldn't, and then I did. I looked at the phone bill and found a number that appeared more than any other. I drove by the firm on a Thursday at 8 p.m., and his car was in the lot, which proved nothing and also proved nothing. I asked him once, casually, who Renee was, watching his face for the half second before he answered. He said, "Renee? She's the project coordinator on the Halston build. Why?" Easy, clean, no pause. And I looked at him. This man I had built 4 years with, this man whose coffee order I knew, and whose childhood I had heard in pieces, and whose breathing I knew by sound in the dark, and I could not tell if he was lying. That inability destroyed something in me quietly and completely. Because if I couldn't trust my own reading of a man I had shared a bed with for 4 years, then what exactly was I trusting? It was my friend Lorraine who said the thing I needed to hear. Lorraine had known me since college and had the specific gift of people who love you enough to say the hard sentence without softening it into something useless. We were sitting in her car outside a coffee shop in late January when I told her everything. All of it. The pauses, the phone, the name, the drive past the office, the way I kept explaining things to myself. She let me finish. Then she said, "Claire, you're spending all this energy trying to figure out if your gut is right. What if instead you just found out?" I said, "What does that mean?" She said, "It means stop looking for permission to believe what you already believe. Find out, actually find out, and then decide what you do with the truth." I drove home that night and I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, and I made a decision. I spent 2 weeks planning, not frantically, carefully, the way you do something when you understand that the difference between knowing and proving is the difference between being heard and being dismissed. I purchased a small device the size of a thumb drive, wireless, disguised as a phone charger block, the kind that sits in a wall outlet and becomes invisible inside a week because every home has 4 of them and nobody looks at them twice. I placed it in the living room on a Tuesday while Daniel was in the shower. I told myself I would know within a month. I knew within 11 days. But none of that is what broke me open on that cold porch at 6:15 in the morning, because here is what I had not planned for. On the night before my fake work trip, sitting at the dinner table, watching Daniel talk about a documentary he wanted to watch on the weekend, being warm and present and completely ordinary, I felt something I was not prepared to feel. Grief. Not anger, not vindication, not the hard, clean certainty I had been waiting for, just grief. Grief for the October wedding with the leaves doing what October leaves do. Grief for the coffee order remembered. Grief for the man who had made me feel chosen, and for the woman who had believed, for 4 good years, that she was. I excused myself to the kitchen. I stood at the sink and ran the water and breathed. Then I dried my hands and went back to the table and watched the rest of the documentary, because I was not finished yet. There was one more thing I needed to know, not what he had done, but what he would do the moment he thought I was gone. So I kissed him goodbye at 6:15 a.m. I walked out the door, and 11 seconds later, my phone buzzed. I stood on that porch, and I read that message, and then I read it again. It was her name, a time, and 3 words after it that I am not going to repeat here because they belong to the ugliest part of a story I am slowly putting down. But I will tell you what those 3 words told me. They told me it wasn't new. They told me it had a rhythm and a routine and a language that 2 people develop when something has been going on long enough to become comfortable. They told me this had not been a moment of weakness. This had been a choice, made repeatedly, while I slept in the same bed, while I cooked in the same kitchen, while I convinced myself I was the problem for suspecting. I stood on the porch. I did not cry. I had done my crying at the kitchen sink the night before. What I felt instead was a cold, clear, settled thing. The feeling of a decision that has already been made arriving in your body as fact. I put my phone in my pocket. I walked to the car parked 2 streets over. I drove to Lorraine's house, and I called my attorney from her kitchen table while she made coffee and did not ask me any questions I wasn't ready to answer. I need to tell you about the next 90 days, because I don't want this to be a story where the hard part happens and then everything is suddenly fine. It was not fine. Divorce is not a door you walk through and find yourself already on the other side. It is a long hallway that requires you to keep moving through it, even on the days when you would rather sit down on the floor. Daniel's initial response, when I sat across from him 4 days later in our living room with a folder on the table between us, was denial. Not surprise, denial, which told me everything I needed to know about the kind of man I had married. He said the message was taken out of context. He said I had violated his privacy. He said I had manufactured a crisis out of nothing, and the word nothing landed in that room like something physical because I had 3 months of pauses and 1 phone face down and a message sent 11 seconds after a door clicked shut, and he was calling it nothing, and for 1 terrible second I felt the old reflex rise up in me. The reflex my mother had handed to me without knowing she was handing me anything at all. I felt it rise, and I let it pass. I looked at Daniel Whitfield across the coffee table where we had spent 100 ordinary evenings, and I said very quietly, I didn't come here to argue. I came to tell you that I already know, and that my attorney will be in touch by end of week. I stood up. I walked to the door. He called my name once. I did not turn around. There is a version of the next 90 days I could compress into a paragraph, but I am not going to do that because the 90 days were real and they were hard, and I think you deserve the honest version. I moved into Lorraine's guest room for 6 weeks. I went to work every day at the advertising firm where I had been an account director for 3 years, and I sat in meetings and made decisions and answered emails, and nobody in that building knew that I was rebuilding my entire life in the hours before and after I walked through their door. My mother called when she found out. She was not unkind, but she said the thing I knew she would say because it was the thing she had always been taught to say. She said, "Are you sure you've tried everything, Claire?" And I said, "Mom, I need you to hear what I'm about to tell you." And I told her, not the compressed version, not the version designed to make it easy to receive, the real version. The pauses, the phone. The message sent 11 seconds after the door closed. The word nothing sitting in our living room. My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't know it had gotten that far." I said, "I know, because I was too busy explaining it away to tell anyone." Another silence. Then, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry I taught you to do that." And that sentence, that one specific sentence from my mother, undid something in me that I had not known was still tied. I sat on Lorraine's guest bed and I cried the way you cry when something that has been tight in you for a very long time finally releases. Not because the situation was fixed, because I had finally stopped pretending it was fine. The divorce was finalized 7 months after that morning on the porch. Daniel did not make it easy. He made it the specific kind of difficult that people make things when they are more concerned with not being the villain of a story than with doing the right thing. There were delays, there were counter-arguments. There was a version of events his attorney presented that I recognized as the denial I had watched him construct live across our coffee table. None of it changed the outcome. I walked out of that courthouse on a Thursday afternoon in September with Lorraine on one side and my mother, who had driven up from Raleigh and said nothing except, "I'm here," when I opened the door, on the other. And I stood on those courthouse steps in the September sun, and I breathed. I am going to tell you where I am now, not because the story needs a perfect ending, but because I think you deserve to know that what comes after the hard part is real and worth reaching. I am still in the same city. I have my own apartment now. 3rd floor, good light, a kitchen I cook in on Sunday mornings while something plays on the speaker in the corner. I am back at the firm I love, doing work that makes me feel capable in a way that has nothing to do with anyone's approval. I went to therapy. I want to say that plainly, because I think we do not say it plainly enough. I went to therapy and I sat across from a woman named Dr. Anaya Reeves every Thursday for 11 months, and I unpacked the thing my family had handed me, the reflex, the explaining, the keeping of peace at the cost of my own knowing, and I looked at it clearly, and I began the slow work of setting it down. I am not done with that work, but I am doing it. My mother and I talk differently now. Not perfectly, but honestly, in a way that feels like two women who have decided to stop pretending together and start figuring it out instead. She said something to me last spring that I keep in a specific place. She said, "I spent my whole life thinking calm was the same as strong. You're the one who showed me the difference." I have not spoken to Daniel since the courthouse. I don't have anything to say to him. What he did is his to carry. What I did, the planning, the patience, the mourning on the porch, I carry that differently. Not as anger, not as victory, as evidence. Evidence that I knew myself well enough to trust what I was seeing. Evidence that when everything in me said something is wrong, I was right. And that being right, not in the vindictive sense, but in the deep, personal, finally I trust myself sense, has changed the way I move through every room I walk into now. I want to say something to you before this story ends. To the person watching this who has been explaining things away, the person who has been calling their own instincts paranoia, the person who has been making themselves smaller and quieter and more accommodating and waiting to see if that is finally enough to make the thing feel safe again. I need you to hear this. The problem was never your suspicion. The problem was never that you noticed. The problem was that you had been taught by someone somewhere who meant well or didn't that noticing out loud was the greater offense. It is not. Noticing is not the problem. Noticing is the gift. The moment you stop talking yourself out of what you can see clearly, that is the moment everything actually begins. You do not have to have it all figured out. You do not have to have a folder and an attorney and a plan before you are allowed to trust yourself. You just have to stop explaining. Start there. That is enough. If this story reached something real in you tonight, drop a comment right now and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Your city, your state, your country. It matters to us here at Tessa Stories more than we can say, because every single location you drop is proof that this community is real, that these stories matter, and that none of us are sitting in this alone. We read every comment, every one. And if you are not subscribed yet, do it right now, because the next story coming to this channel is about a woman who found something in her mother-in-law's house that explained 10 years of her marriage in a single afternoon. You will not want to miss it. We'll see you there.